Hello, everyone. This is Ryan Howells with Leavitt Partners, and I'm pleased to be joined by Scott Stuewe from DirectTrust and Janice Reed from the HL7 Fast Digital Identity Workgroup to talk about the topic of digital identity federation today. What we thought we would do is go through the work that we have done in the CARIN Alliance to date, some of the projects we've been working on. And then we wanted to talk, Scott is going to talk about the CARIN credentialing policy and some of DirectTrust's effort in digital identity. And then Janice is going to back clean up and be able to talk about what FAST is doing from an interoperable digital identity and patient matching FHIR implementation guide. I think the big takeaway here is that we're all working together, not just the three of us, but I know many of you on the phone and others on this topic. We're also working obviously with TEFCA and the RCE and the CMS Aligned Network community. So this is very much a coordinated effort across the board. So thank you to all of you who are participating in those efforts. And if you're not, we're happy to be able to let you know how to get involved. So let's start with some of the work we're doing in the CARIN Alliance around digital identity. Whoops, sorry, I just went a little bit too fast. I think everybody knows now, especially in this group, but the CARIN Alliance was formed back in 2016, focused on getting consumers digital access to their healthcare data, where, when, and how they want to achieve their goals, primarily with the use of the FHIR APIs. And so our community has actually been the largest community that I know of, other than obviously some of the folks in Da Vinci, but I know we're still anxious to get B2B FHIR working at scale in the US, but we've worked with FHIR for a long, long time, really since that 2017, 2018 time in production. And we've learned a lot about what works on FHIR, what doesn't work, what we need with OpenID Connect, and all of this stuff. So a lot of these kind of lessons learned comes from our app community and them connecting to these FHIR API endpoints for patient access purposes. And that's what we'll share with you today. But first, to level set, when we say digital identity, what do we mean? And so we've got two slides on this. The first thing when we think about a digital identity is a mobile driver's license. And the reason we think about that is that we say to ourselves, what is it that we need to have in our possession to prove that we are who we say we are? We will not, Janice is going to touch on a little bit about patient matching today, but patient matching and digital identity are two very, very different things. They certainly relate to each other, but they're very different. And so we're not talking about patient matching today. We're just talking about how do I prove that I am who I say I am across systems. So in the physical world, when we go into be able to understand and say, this is who I say that I am. Let's say we go into a DMV. My son actually went this morning, ironically enough, to get his. He just turned 21, so he got off his provisional license. But when they go in there and when someone goes in for the first time and gets a driver's license, they have an opportunity to go in and say, here are a series of trusted identifiers. And then they take those series of trusted identifiers, like your birth certificate, your passport, your gas bill, mortgage, other things that they ask for at the DMV. And then in return, they give you a trusted identity. And that is in the form of a physical driver's license. And in the mobile world, it's going to work very similarly. We will give trusted organizations a series of trusted identifiers digitally, and they will give us back a trusted identity that is an identity credential that allows for us to then authenticate ourselves potentially onto different websites. Mobile driver's license is the first foray into that. It's really just taking your physical driver's license. It pings an organization called AMVA, validates that is like the association of all the DMVs in the whole country, and says, yep, this driver's license is actually valid. They did physically come in here and give us a set of trusted identifiers. Therefore, you can trust this. And then Apple and Google and others, Samsung, have actually now provided functionality for that to be uploaded to your wallet. When you go to the airport now, I've used this for the last few years, you can just, instead of taking out your driver's license, you can actually just take out your wallet, and similar to like Apple or Google Pay, You just double click on it, tap on the TSA screen, and fly through security. It's really pretty slick. MDLs are live in roughly a dozen states or so. It should be live in around 30 by the end of the year, is what we've been told. And so this is going to be a thing, and it's going to be, it's highly secure. It's all consent based. It's stored in the hardware of your phone and in these secure enclaves of your wallet related to it. And you often only need to, in some cases, share the information you need to share with a third party entity. Like, for example, if you go to a bar, you don't have to give them your address information. You just have to prove whether or not you're actually over 21. And so there's security provisions actually that are built into this too, which is exciting. And then we can take that information and then be able to upload that potentially into creating, we're calling really a digital identity credential with one of these credentialing service providers. With the NIST guidelines, there are two different types. There's one IL1 providers. You've seen this with login with Google, login with LinkedIn, login with Apple. Those are IL1 providers. They're basically is just a username and password. There's not much identity proofing that goes along with that. Or there's what's called IL2 providers. They are the ones who actually truly identity proof you. The animation on the right-hand side kind of takes you through how that actually works, just with the clear process. But there's a whole bunch of set of trusted identity providers that are out there. There's a link there at the bottom. The Cantera Initiative actually certifies those IL2 and AL2 providers. There's a list out there where you can see who those folks are. Scott will talk about the work that they're doing in DirectTrust to also certify IL2 providers in the DirectTrust community. And so we're going to have two certification bodies out there. They're going to certify these IL2 providers, which is really exciting. And the last thing I'd say is this is not new. There's 110, more than 110 million Americans that have one of these trusted identity providers today. There are multiple federal agencies that have implemented this, and there's at least 26 states that have also implemented it during COVID for unemployment insurance for some of the most vulnerable in our society. So this is very much mainstream now. And we're excited to be able to bring a lot of this stuff into healthcare. So how does that relate to healthcare? Well, the CARIN Alliance saw this pretty early because we were looking at a solution where someone could prove their identity once and use that same identity credential across multiple different systems. And so we first recommended this to ONC back in 2017. The NIST guidelines actually came out in the summer of 2017, and we said, man, this is awesome. If we could have one of these digital identity credentials and use that as the main way in which we authenticate across these different portals, it would be really neat. ONC and the RCE came out in their first draft and talked about IL2 and AL2, which was exciting to see that support. And then we did a whole bunch of things over the next few years, including doing a white paper. We launched our Digital Identity Federation POC in 2022. We've done a whole bunch of work around this topic for many years now. And most recently, we published our credential policy that Scott's going to talk about here shortly. And then the CMS Aligned Network announcement also now requires this digital identity. So we've got ONC and CMS aligned. We have the private sector aligned, and now we just need to implement it and trying to find ways to be able to federate it. So in the topic of federation, we did a pilot back in 2023. You can see it on our website. We have a YouTube channel. Doesn't have a lot of viewers, but that's okay. But a YouTube channel, hardly anybody knows exists, but it's got a whole bunch of videos on it that actually shows the results of the proof of concept. So you can see kind of how we did it. And we said to ourselves, how do we use standards and this credentialing policy, and what kind of things do we need to think about with business and operations? And HHS had this thing called an identity broker service called XMS. Could we use that identity broker service to have a bunch of identity providers as part of that? We kind of used all of those ingredients to try to say, what's the recipe for how we would do identity federation in healthcare? And we learned a lot as part of that. We learned a ton of things. Again, this is all in the 50-page document if you want to read it. It's very technical, and it's for those that are now just really starting to look at things, I would highly recommend it. We've been told by some identity folks that they just loved it because it actually goes into a ton of detail around how this could actually work in real life. Again, it's on our website if you want to take a look. but learned a lot here. I won't touch on a lot of this stuff. I will say on this kind of middle bullet here about demographic attributes. I know there's a robust conversation going on right now about, from an identity perspective, like what are the demographic attributes we should use for patient matching, but then also how does that relate to digital identity as well? And Janice is going to touch on this briefly, but what I would say is that recently, and this is not in the slides, but we have looked to find ways where the credentialing service providers can agree on a common data model that's going to be open. And that data model is going to find a way in which they can be able to have a set of demographics and set of attributes that they're consistently matching against, including, for example, historical addresses and email and phone and mobile phone numbers and things that we haven't particularly used in the past. And that's going to provide a more robust set of patient matching criteria so that hopefully we can get more responses on the network. And again, that's all going to be part of the open standards process. Again, financial considerations. One of the things that we found as part of this pilot is that if we think about true identity federation, I proved my identity once and used that same credential across multiple relying parties. That's a new concept. It actually isn't really in production anywhere in any industry in the entire United States. And so we're doing something, we're really breaking the glass on something that's never been done before, which we're kind of excited about because usually healthcare is far behind. And in this topic, we're actually far ahead. And so we're asking questions that really no one has ever asked before. What does that start to look like in terms of how we think about the business models and the operational way in which this is supposed to be run and managed and handled from a federation perspective? We need to kind of think through those topics, and they're tough. They're really hard topics. We want to avoid any antitrust issues, as was discussed at the outset, and we're trying to figure out ways to do it. And so we're very open to getting your thoughts on what that potentially could look like. And then finally, there's kind of legal and obviously risk management considerations too. The big question that we had, and this is, again, love feedback on this topic. Who at a payer or provider needs to sign off on accepting a digital identity credential from a third party? And I bet the answer is different depending on the organization, but we need to figure out the answer to that question for a representative sample of payers and providers so we can understand what their concerns are about this, or their questions, or their excitement, or their feedback, and that we can be able to figure out how this could actually operate at scale in the US. So if you've got feedback on that, we'd really, really love to hear it. Just have a brief conversation with your team that you think could be responsible for making that decision. So we've then actually done things together with the industry on how we actually test this out in real life. So the first thing that I think we all did as related to it, I know Epic took a great leadership role in here, and we appreciate that a ton, is how would you do IAS on TEFCA? Like, what does that start to look like in the current model, really the XCPD model and the CCDA type model? What does that actually start to look like? So Epic's done some good work in publishing on their website interoperability and what IAS on TEFCA looks like, and how a third-party IAS provider could actually use digital identity in that network. Others had participated in this as well, kind of doing a fairly similar flow. So it kind of walks through what that actually looks like. And this is kind of current state, like how could we actually make it work in the current state, which it is, which is exciting. The second thing that was done is Selfie worked with Clear and MedAllies and Connie, which is an HIE in the state of Connecticut. MedAllies is obviously a QHIN and Clear is an identity provider, and Selfie is a consumer-facing app. And they said, what would it look like if we use that single credential on care quality and really looked at it from an HIE perspective? Like, could we actually get information back from an HIE using a QHIN to make that happen? So we got some results back from that. Really exciting stuff. It actually worked. No one got hurt or injured. There was no mismatch records returned to the consumer. It was actually a really good early adopter wasn't even a pilot. I would call it an early adopter project because it's live, and that provided some really good data and some good information for us. And now we're kind of really in phase three. Phase three is really our ideal state where we would like to be, which is, can we use FHIR and OpenID Connect to federate a single OpenID Connect credential across multiple different relying parties on any network, not just TEFCA, but really any network? What does that start to look like? And Commonwealth showed this a little bit with BeWell and Athena back at HIMSS last year. They showed this in production where a single digital identity credential could be used to authenticate across multiple thousands of Athena sites, which was really neat. And we're doing a pilot right now with the CARIN Alliance and the CMS Aligned Network participants to engage in an early adopter effort to federate this single IL2 credential across the board. So again, if you're interested in that, if you've signed up for the CMS Aligned Network, that would be awesome. We'll be able to get you guys plugged into that effort too. We've started to actually map out what this could look like with that work on the CMS Aligned Network. What does that actually start to look like, and how would that actually start to match across the board? And then finally, kind of how does this all come together? And this is where I'll stop and turn it over to Scott. But this is kind of at least how we're seeing the world in terms of how we could bring these different pieces together. We think that there's these legacy data stores. We think that a lot of folks are going to have these cloud-based data stores too, to run AI, to maintain their APIs, to do some of the workflow that the EHR and their claim system and other systems, legacy systems that they have, may not support today, but they may need that. Folks are going to have these API gateways, and again, to have an ability to connect to these different endpoints across the board. We think everyone's going to have trusted identity credentials. TEFCA requires payers, providers, and patients to have digital identity credentials, and CMS Aligned networks require providers and patients to do that. So we think that initially, as we go into FHIR-based data exchange, it's going to be app-to-app based data exchange that are going to require secure login so that we know who you say you are, we know what organization or individual you represent, and we know what data you're authorized to receive. And in the right, there's going to be open source standards like Inferno and Picky to inform data conformance and quality. We're always going to need to use an RLS, a public utility. We're always going to need to have some type of endpoint directory. It sounds like CMS is building that for us, but at least from what we're understanding as far as what everybody's building and working on right now, we think this could be maybe what the future could look like. We'll see. Very hypothetical at this point, but we think that's how digital identity is going to play a role in kind of the broader ecosystem as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Scott Stuewe.
Ryan, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having us here. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Ryan, and I'll dive right in. So what we really want to accomplish here in digital identity is really not so difficult. It's not so difficult to understand. As a user, I want this notion of a single credential, as he's described, to prove who I am and to gain access to records. And that's true regardless of what kind of user I am, whether I'm a clinical user or a consumer. As a data holder, I want to know that the user is who they claim to be, but also that when they come back, that I can trust that they are who they claim to be again. So this is both the notion of identity assurance and also then authentication. Those two mechanisms are really important to kind of to the data holder, that they have that established. If you do a build for me, Ryan, real quick, there's also one thing that these two constituencies agree on, even though it seems sort of an a bit of a these are at odds at some level. On the other hand, their alignment is to prevent unauthorized access. There's no disagreement that that's the goal here. Next slide. So we know kind of what this looks like, what technical trust frameworks look like on the internet. There's really, two big, ways to think about this. First, in the financial services space, you can use a Visa or MasterCard anywhere you go. That's, people have pretty much learned that they can use this to get access to cash from their bank, or, to do credit card transactions. That's a pretty good analogy. A better one might be actually the internet generally, and this is not really that old when you think about it. The internet is just not that old of a thought. But these two identity assurance environments, ICANN and the CA browser forum, are basically both trust frameworks that make it so that people can feel confident on the internet. Now, that's not to say that in both of these ecosystems there isn't fraud. There is. However, these organizations work very hard to prevent certain kinds of fraud that are really related to whether or not an asserting party is who they say they are on the internet. So that's a really important thing to establish. Go to the next slide for me. So what does a trust framework do? I think when people talk about trust frameworks in the healthcare ecosystem, they frequently think of the policy trust frameworks that enable healthcare information exchange. But the trust frameworks that exist in the identity space have been there a lot longer than that, right? So if you think about this notion of knowing who you say you are on the internet, the ICANN is the organization that makes sure that when you go to a website that it is in fact a unique domain name, that's the only domain name that is the only website using that domain name, and that works pretty well. That actually doesn't, you don't find a lot of circumstances where it's not functioning effectively. The CA browser forum also sets rules for how browsers are going to interpret certificates on the internet. Mostly the internet functions using PKI. So PKI is really fundamentally the infrastructure that the internet runs on. I'm sure most on this call understand that, but the trust frameworks that support it have to do these things. They have to basically enforce both and perhaps create policies to certify organizations for their interoperability capabilities, their technical capabilities, their infrastructure, and also their legal obligations under a trust framework. And all of the organizations that certify to a trust framework, basically agree to do all of the policies and the necessary, technical aspects. The legality aspects of this is where agreements come in, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But this is really the way QHIN business-to-business exchange is expected to happen. This is both the brokered model and the facilitated FHIR model. And so I know that in this work group, you all have been talking about communications via FHIR. Facilitated FHIR is a little different than just communicating FHIR, and part of the reason why facilitated FHIR is needed is because of the presence of two QHINs in the story. So if two QHINs are going to be involved, the way the brokered model works for IHE exchange is the passage of a transaction between lots of hops. So the participants and sub-participants are communicating with each other. And then when a participant gets a message that's been a query from another QHIN sub-participant, the response goes from QHIN to participant to sub-participant, several hops, and that is what we mean by brokering. So the QHIN actually does the job of finding multiple places where the records are and returns all that data in one packet back to the querier. And so that's the basic approach that is being utilized in the IHE exchange world today. The thing about FHIR is FHIR depends on authentication, and so as a consequence, it doesn't work very well to pass a FHIR bundle around. Although it's possible, it doesn't, sort of breaks its security model. Its security model depends upon authentication of client to server, and so for business-to-business exchange, even when we're talking about kind of servers talking to servers, knowing I'm talking to who I'm thinking I'm talking to is important to establish. So if you go to the next slide, this is the mechanisms that we put in place to make facilitated FHIR work in TEFCA. The way it works is that there's a single root of trust that issues certificates to the various sub-participants. And this allows for the sub-participants to know that they're talking to who they think they are on the other side. The role of the QHIN in this model changes radically. So the QHIN was responsible to pass transactions back, so like basically broker and obtain all of the records from all the external sources, bring those back in a single response to the querier. That changes in the model where facilitated FHIR is working. Instead, what happens is the sub-participant or the participant is going to ask the QHIN where to look. So using the record location services capabilities of the QHIN and the QHIN's connections to other QHINs, and then making the query to the sub-participant on the other end without going through the QN at all. So that's how this works. And the way in which it works securely is the fact that these sub-participants all have certificates in place that actually prove to the caller, prove to the responder that the initiator is who they say they are. So go to the next slide. And this is sort of the two identity-focused frameworks that are in the ecosystem on the healthcare side today. Now, CARIN initiative is broad and international and actually does identity assurance for IL2 credential providers as well as others. And this is sort of the full service list from their website. On the other side is the DirectTrust community, mostly organizations that do PKI-based exchange, although not exclusively. And today we are all going to talk about how DirectTrust is moving into the space that allows for our participants to also issue non-PKI credentials. But these are the two identity-focused frameworks. So the trick is, if we're going to establish reciprocity and true federation in the market, we have to basically get policy equivalence between the trust frameworks. And so a long time ago, 2021, go to the next slide, we embarked on a project. Okay, so basically what happened was DirectTrust and Cantera came together at the CARIN Alliance with Ryan and his team, and actually some of you, I think, were actually participants in this exercise as well over the course of years, literally started in 21. The idea was, well, how can we, given the fact that the Cantera side of the fence really kind of looks at 863 as their Bible, and the public key infrastructure side of the world looks at this other thing, the RFC 3647, which establishes the public key infrastructure certificate policy framework, like what it looks like. And so what the advantage to 3647 is it takes it's beyond 863 and looks at also 853 aspects of 853 are related to cybersecurity health. So assessing security and privacy in addition to assessing identity assurance. And so that's really important, I think, for folks to establish a sense of comfort around the organizations that are doing this work. So we basically used this as a framework for comparing DirectTrust and Cantera work. And so we basically, this 3647 is used in the context of the federal PKI. Go ahead to the next build, Ryan, is DirectTrust also used this same 3647 for all that work that we do. So build one more time. And then, so what we decided is going to take this RFC 3647 and use it for a CARIN credential policy standard. That could be the framework for organizations who want to establish basically policy equivalence with both DirectTrust and Cantera with one step to basically compare themselves to this standard. So the sections in this are the same sections that are in 3647, but they're slightly changed to deal with the fact that this is a credential and not a certificate. It has to be de-PKIified, so if you will. So a lot of things were done here. One of the things that's most interesting about this in the process of producing the CARIN credential identity policy in section 9, which is the other business and legal matters, what the CARIN credential policy does today is it allows for and supports the notion of a federation agreement, which is the way in which these federations work at scale. DirectTrust today has a federation for direct secure messaging that is one of the more successful federations of its sort in the ecosystem. Our goal is to try and create something that is as robust for digital identity that will work in the same way that DirectTrust's federation works. And so what makes that work is a federation agreement that defines the business and legal matters in greater detail than the policy can do. So next slide. One other thing I wanted to mention is that we are also creating a DirectTrust identity provider policy that actually will be a mate with our registration authority policy, so that we can also, and our community can also issue the same sort of credentials that the Cantera certified organizations can issue. again, it'll be our community that issues these credentials, not DirectTrust. Next slide. And so this is really what we land on. So we land on a press release that Cantera and DirectTrust and CARIN put out. I think this is about 3 weeks old. This is, again, a work that started in 21 and has been a long labor of love. I believe that folks are kind of perusing this and taking a look at it to see if we've missed anything. But we worked pretty hard on it. I've looked at it pretty carefully. I think it's actually pretty good. I read it again last week, Ryan. So I feel like we made a pretty good stab at solving this problem. It's meaty work. So if you get a chance to review it, and if you're interested in this sort of thing, take a look at the work we've done. We think that this is an important piece of framework for us to actually establish a solid environment for both business to business exchange and for consumer to business exchange.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for your partnership on this. So we've got the technical side of the house. Now we've got the policy side of the house that Scott mentioned, and now we need to memorialize that into an open standard, and that's where Janice comes in. Janice?
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you, Scott, for having us today. FAST is a fire accelerator under HL7 and connecting the healthcare ecosystem. And as such, we're working on the architecture and the infrastructure with identity, security, consent, national directory, and testing at scale. So we're working very closely across the accelerators and excited about the continued partnership that we're developing with CARIN and DirectTrust. So our identity STU is publishing as we speak. It was finalized in October with ballot reconciliation and all of the things we needed to do to move it forward. Our kind of focus is an identity assurance standard enabling trusted, scalable, and reliable identity verification for individuals and businesses across the healthcare ecosystem. Our guide is providing rules for how to match and link those records safely. It also defines what pieces of information, such as name, address, and identifiers, should be included and how to label them so that receiving systems can kind of interpret it and compare them consistently. Our playbook that we're developing and that is part of our IG gives health sector specific guidance on how to manage identities in health apps and in health records to be ready for best practice person matching. We have developed and identified an HL7 person identifier, which is the digital identity component of this IG. And this person identifier establishes a trusted, interoperable digital identifier that can be used across networks to represent an individual with high confidence. It also provides a common anchor for linking records across organizations, supporting identity assurance and patient matching at scale. And it's built to help support the conversations we're having around the CMS Aligned Network's vision for consistent, secure, person-centric interoperability. The identifier is issued, is issued after identity proofing at a defined identity assurance level, and then other recognized frameworks. And it represents a verified identity event. It binds verified demographic and credential evidence to a unique digital identity. We have new use case descriptions that are relevant to Kafka workflows. We're also working as a cross-organizational standard for demographics that comprise a good match request, whether it's B2B or B2C. And also we're integrating our other project with Fast Security to securely scale the federated identity without the one-off custom integrations or an identity broker to be able to apply consumer match and also smart consumer directed exchange. It also is looking at the infrastructure for the future to be able to improve the reduced reliance on demographic-based matching in favor of matching on identifiers like the HL7 person identifier. It also has broad reliance on reusable credentials and all the things that Ryan mentioned at the beginning of being able to collaboratively work together with credential service providers to make health data easier to access and also integrate with transactions using mobile driver's licenses and digital insurance cards. Identity assurance is something that we have as guidance inside of the IG. We call it IDIAL. It kind of gives you a step up into being able to collect different information and be able to be ready, specifically in healthcare, to become a digital identity in the future with a mobile number and email address always collected. It also identifies what demographics and how to verify them. and specific patient resource structures. So it gives you kind of a level of stepping into things, and we have a maturity level idea across that. Next slide. So identity management maturity model actually gives kind of a visual of how to create the consumer visual progression for probabilistic matching all the way up to the digital identity adoption. And again, we have our guidance and recommendations and best practices in the IG, and then we're continuing to work on technical capabilities. And Ryan and CARIN Alliance has actually donated the digital trust framework that Scott and Ryan both talked about as we continue to evolve the guidance and the capabilities. Unique identifiers or other verified demographics are inserted by trusted applications, which also authenticate users and follow best practice match input and identity verification floors. So this is kind of a visual on that fast identity consumer facing both B2C and the payer provider B2B workflows, how we have our IDIAL assurance levels as far as guidance, but then how it also supports IAL2 and AAL2. And you've seen this as you look at fast security and how we work with tiered OAuth, because you probably used it if you've accessed PayPal or eBay. Fast security tiered OAuth, along with other foundational fast security components, enables that other tier of OAuth, allowing consumer choice in what they decide to work with as far as secure portable identity services, but also eliminating custom identity provider integrations and pairwise agreements. So everything we're talking about having everything seamless for the consumer and allowing the industry to be able to have digital identity to log in first and then have that connect across the process for consumers and multiple providers and payers. This is an example with Fast ID and Clear. Again, the HL7 person identifier may alternatively be included as a FHIR identifier in the resources referenced by the Smart FHIR user claim, and also the ability to use this in other contexts where attributes are shared for the purpose of patient matching. And this just shows some of the insight into that. We're also working with our FAST members and the industry on the mobile driver's license and the digital insurance card integration and how that can come together, again, to make it smoother for consumers, but also for the whole process and the things that Ryan laid out at the beginning and some of the initiatives of what we want to see for the ecosystem.
Quick comment on this, Janice. CARIN Alliance is working with the wallet vendors right now, Google and Apple and everybody, and looking at what this looks like from an actual operational perspective. So they use something called MDocs to make that happen. And we're having active discussions with them right now about whether the insurance card can stand alone or whether it actually needs to be tied to a digital identity and how they actually operate that inside the wallet world. So if that's of interest to this group, we'd be happy to talk to you about it as well. So I think it's the last slide.
That would be great, Ryan, and thank you for that. And I think that's the whole aspect of this opportunity for the presentation, is we want to continue to get feedback. We have not only identity published with STU2, but also security. So these two together are very much bringing to life the opportunity for the CARIN framework's policy intent by defining how trust can be technically implemented, validated, and enforced across the ecosystem. And also being able to give that deterministic high assurance identity matching with what fast identity brings forward, and then the scalable, secure authorization and credential validation from fast security. And I'll put some links in the chat here to a few of our pages, including the IG itself, our project page, and then we will have both identity and security coming up at the virtual Connectathon in January.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here, and we appreciate everybody participating here, and we're happy to take some questions from the group. This group is not shy.
Uh, I think I'll go. I'm
Thank
Harinder
you.
from Blue Shield of California. So my question is particularly the FAST standards. How are they being incorporated under the new CMS using the 5/7 mandate, particularly for peer-to-peer exchanges, where I think there's a bit of concern on how the actual member matching would work, and there's risks to um, the wrong data being exchanged.
Julie, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can't speak to what might happen in regulation or as far as pointing to the implementation guide itself. We are just prior to an STU2 release, so often you're not even a candidate for something like that until you have a publicly available second version. I will say, though, that the initial version, STU1 of the FAST Identity Implementation Guide, is definitely recognized by ONC ASTP in the Interoperability Standards Advisory and is the only digital identity and patient matching standard in the ISA. So it's being followed, and I know HL7 is not intending to have a different patient matching and identity management implementation guide. That is something we were told when we brought the project to FMG several years ago. So I think in the absence of anything else, and this being the only nationally recognized patient matching standard, those who want to use a best practice would use this one. And hopefully you'll join the meetings and continue to help in its ongoing development.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, no, I really appreciate this. I think this is a real problem, especially since for peer-to-peer, when we moved from patient mediated, let's get those mixed, or from member matching exchanges to member mediated. So these standards would really come in handy. So all organizations can align to a common way of how we are matching members as data flows across organizational boundaries.
Was there another question in that?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, the IG does separate out those different use cases and have consumer initiated workflows and specially designed minimum bars for that specific use case as well.
Michael, go ahead.
Hi, this is Michael Westover from Providence, and this identity is a huge problem at health systems like Providence, and we have enormous numbers of resources that go to deal with this today, and it really has a strong impact on patient care. I'm curious, could someone paint the picture for what this experience might look like for patients that are interacting with the health system, and how you envision that will work? Is there software that needs to be bolted onto the EHR, or EHR is going to take this? I'm just trying to imagine how it will work for people walking in for an office visit.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that, Michael. So patients are generally using one of two ways to engage with their health system. They're either using their EHR's, the provider's EHR app, to be able to engage there and find a way where they can be able to schedule appointments, do other things, or they may use a app of their choice, one of the kind of the CARIN apps that are out there to make that happen. And so what we anticipate happening, and actually what is happening in some places already today in production, is that someone could go into their patient-facing app, either one of those. They could prove their digital identity and go through this process because they'll have one of these, again, 110 million Americans have one of these credentials. And once they've done that, they can access all their data, not just from their provider that's there at their EHR, but potentially from any of aggregate their health information and aggregate some of the other information they have from any of the other providers that they have used in the past without a need to actually authenticating again. And with the magic of TEFCA and QHINs and all the other things that we're doing. It's really think of it as a single sign-on for healthcare. And we not only see this as an opportunity for patients, but we also see this as an opportunity for providers. And finding ways where providers can also do something similar, not just even within their EHR, but to the other systems that they have within their core firewall that they use on a day-to-day basis. So think of it as, I guess the best way to think about it is kind of single sign-on, because if we've proven that we are who we say we are, we should be able to voluntarily use that credential for multiple different systems, which will allow us to have a much more secure environment, and it's much more person controlled at that point. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. And one quick follow-up question. Is the expectation that provider organizations will have to buy additional modules of their EHR or to pay for software and hardware to install in their offices? I'm just curious about the resource lift that you're seeing.
We have EHRs on the phone. They should speak for themselves. But I would just say that I think that what we're seeing in the market, Michael, is that I think both EHRs are supporting this, and also we're seeing that supporting like kind of digital identity credentials in their own environment, and we're also seeing entities, whether that be health plans or providers, to also be able to have a digital identity credential that maps to all of their systems on the back end, and that we're seeing kind of both models come to fruition in the market today. At least that's what we're seeing, but others should chime in there.
And Ryan, I just wanted to also mention that I think that organizations that don't have the ability to process an external credential may have work to do in that regard. And so, but I do think that there are really clear standards that are now been laid out for that. And so I think it's not difficult to imagine that this could happen at scale, but it does require that regardless of the type of credential, the server has to be able to, process the credential from an external source, as opposed to, processing a credential that's really, frankly, just the username and password that was set up in the portal, which is that if we're going to get to single sign-on, we have to be able to not have to use that, credential that was issued by the HR.
Yeah, OIDC is required by ONC too. That helps us with that. Joe, go ahead.
Hi, I was curious. Pilots are often in the business of breaking new ground. And so was there anything that you did that you would like to see enshrined in guidance in an IG? Or did everything you do, was everything you did already addressed in, like, for example, the fast identity IG?
Much of it was, Joe. We were somewhat doing this in parallel, but we are actively working together to try to find ways to mirror those two things together. All the stuff we've done in CARIN is open source, so the idea is how do we pull that together with the IG stuff to make sure we're continuing to reconcile. We don't have a lot of time to get into it now. There's 50 pages of kind of recommendations, workflows, and other stuff that's in that pilot. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that I think we still need to continue to sync up on it going forward as well. But the basics of this is IL2, AL2 everywhere, OpenID Connect everywhere. And a lot of that then will kind of somewhat take care of itself if we can get the policy right over time. I'm way oversimplifying here, folks, and this group knows that, but those are kind of the high level points. But Amar, go ahead. You had another question, and then Jason.
Yes, I did have another question. Wonder what the group's thoughts are now. We've discussed this in the member context, but is there any thoughts on maybe extending this to providers? I say this because with the prior auth APIs, and the provider access API, there are two use cases where they're going to be real use cases, and we have to figure out ways how we're going to onboard providers. And this concept that we're thinking primarily in terms of members might be useful, I believe, in the provider context as well.
Yeah, Amar, I mentioned that a couple of times. Again, TEFCA requires providers, payers, and patients to use digital identity credentials. So we do see this as being something that's going to be adopted across the board. The way that FHIR is going to work initially is kind of app-to-app based data exchange, and that requires authentication on both ends. So remember, we've got to trust three things. Are you who you say you are? What organization or individual do you represent? And what data are you authorized to receive? If we can't do that, we can never do FHIR. So like that's absolutely critical to the foundation of, I think, what we're all trying to get accomplished here too. We do have UDAP. We can get into UDAP. That's probably another different conversation. And that's something that could be done with dynamic client app registration with a strong trust framework as well. And we anticipate that's ultimately going to occur with B2B transactions that don't necessarily involve individuals. They're just machine to machine. So that's absolutely in parallel going to work in a similar way. I think just in the interim, the short term, at least what we're seeing on the ground, we're doing these B2B pilots in about 12 different states right now. And we're taking all the work that Trebuchet's done, and we did the work in one Utah. And I know Scott has mentioned this previously on these calls, but we're taking all of that and saying, like, how is it actually going to work? What's the workflow look like? And it's still going to have, at least initially, an authentication piece on both sides to make those connections.
All right, thank you.
Jason?
Yeah, I think I have two questions. I think I'm gonna ask. I'll go the easier one first, hopefully. Can you talk about like how like the single sign-on works from like a digital identity versus like an authorization standpoint? Because I feel like the authorization, like what is being authorized, is not talked about or mentioned here.
Can you expand on that, Jason, for me exactly?
Right. So like in the point-to-point model right now, right, like you sign onto your portal. At that point, we now know who the patient is, at least who the login is for and what patient, right? Whether that's actually the person to be determined. And then at that point, you then authorize to say, I want to see my meds or my problems or my allergies, data. That's what I'm authorizing the app to see. So how does authorization fit into this quote unquote single sign-on workflow?
I can take a stab at that if you'd like. Jason, I think unless Ryan and Scott have something to add, the process I would highlight for the group is that the trust lies in us believing that an identity service with a trusted digital certificate saying that they've authenticated the person and then providing attributes about the person according to the fast identity IG that are sufficiently detailed to match on an individual and that are consistent with the identity verification event at a high enough level of identity assurance will leave the responding organization with a question of whether that information is sufficient for them to make an authorization decision. We are not looking at authorizing being explicit based on that minimum, but that we're suggesting that a best practice that may be a good candidate for deciding to authorize a transaction would consist of at least these verified demographics and a trusted identity service that the relying party data holder can use in that decision.
Right, and I get that, like I get the identity matching piece, right? And my second question is kind of related to that. So I get that part, but like I need to know what scopes to grant in that workflow, right? Like I know who the patient is, I know who the person is, I know who the patient is now, but like what are they actually giving access to for this app, right? And if my endpoint, if they give access to every US CDI data class.
Jason, I hate to be the bad guy, but
we are
we're at time. Yes, but thank you to our presenters, and thank you all for joining. And if you could send Michelle and I a copy of the slides, we would really appreciate it to add that to the minutes. And I hope you all have a wonderful Thursday.
Thank you so much, Casey, for the opportunity. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Scott. Thank you,
Thanks
Julie.
all. Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you all.